Welcome to our adult discipleship class called The Final Days of Jesus. This is week one of that class. I'm so happy that you have decided to join me. You'll see here we'll go through a few things today in the keynote, but I want you to let you know at the very beginning what we offer here. You'll be able to see and probably see more clearly in the PDF that is provided. Whether you're watching on the app or watching on YouTube, you can look just below, and there's a link you can click that will take you to that PDF. I'm excited for this class, in which over the next 6 weeks, we're going to walk through the final week of Jesus' life from Sunday to Sunday. Now, I want to recommend a few resources to you here at the very beginning and sort of let you know what's been helpful for me even as I prep this class. This book, it's called The Final Days of Jesus, is what this class is based on. It's written by Andreas Kostenberger and Justin Taylor with Alexander Stewart. This book is essentially a compiled testimony of the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, as they're put together, and just works like we're going to day by day, Sunday to Sunday, of the last week of Jesus' life. The subtitle for this book is The Most Important Week of the Most Important Person Who Ever Lived. And so what Kostenberger and Taylor have done is compiled the testimonies of the four Gospels into a roughly chronological look at the last week of Jesus' life, saying here's what the Scripture says, and here's some commentaries. We think through what's happening on this particular day, on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and so forth. So I would encourage you, if you're going to take this class, this would be a great book to pick up. I believe it's $14 on Amazon, and I think it's available for Prime. So if you have Prime, you can get that quickly. I would encourage you, pick this up and read it. That I believe beginning on Wednesday, they actually put all the Scripture references. They're quoted in here earlier in the week. They're smaller, so they don't put them all in. But through most of the book, the actual references that we're going to read are going to be quoted in here. And you can find them right in the book. And it's an incredibly useful book and one that I am going to use throughout this course. Now, I sort of tell you what we're going to do each day. Each week that we're together, we're going to begin to work through sort of the last days of Jesus' life, as I told you, Sunday through Sunday. Now, though there are 7 days and 6 weeks, we're not going to go one day at a time because we're going to have to spend more time on Thursday through Sunday. So this to sort of give you an overview of where we're going to go. This week, week one, we're going to cover Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. We'll do 3 days in a row. Week 2, we will cover Wednesday and part of Thursday. On week 3, we'll cover the rest of the Thursday. On week 4, we'll cover part of Friday. On week 5, we'll finish out Friday. And then on week 6, we'll do Saturday and Sunday. So we work through the last days of Jesus. And what I'll do, obviously this is week 1, so you don't have this information, so you've not been able to read, is I'm going to give you the Scripture references today that covers what we walk through as we talk about Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. And at the end of our time together, I'm going to give you the upcoming Scripture references so that if you want to prepare as we think about Wednesday and part of Thursday, you're going to be able to read. I'm going to give you, so that you could this week go and read what is going to be covered next week. As you will read just the raw data, the material from Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and so that next week you might be prepared and have already read some of the material as we begin to work through it. Now, I'll tell you, I'm going to offer commentary, often as Kostenberger and Taylor does, as we walk through this. But largely, I just want us to get, my goal in this 6 weeks, walking through the final days of Jesus, is to just get the story, to understand the importance of what has happened to Christ. I think sometimes in our effort to spiritualize and to apply what has happened to Christ, sometimes we gloss over the details. This is as Kostenberger and Taylor say, the most important week of the most important person who ever lived. You might think about your own week you got married. You probably remember, well, on Monday we did this. We went down to the courthouse and got the marriage certificate. Well, on Thursday we went and picked up the flowers. Friday we decorated. And you remember all those things because it's an important week. We ought to know as believers the important events of the life of Jesus, and particularly the events of the last week of Jesus' life. So that's what we'll do, is we'll work through day by day. I'll give you the text that we're looking at, the texts that are offered. Then we'll offer some commentary, helping to explain those a little bit, and then we'll move on. Kostenberger and Taylor have combined a lot of the resources together for you. You might also be able to find, this is a little bit harder to find, something called a Harmony of the Gospels. I have this one. It's an old one I've had for a long time. That's actually an NIV translation. That's not my favorite translation, but this is helpful. What a Harmony of the Gospel does is help to take the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and to put them in four different columns, put them side by side, so that as we read through the Gospel, I can see Matthew's account and Mark's account and Luke's account and John's account of the same event roughly put together. Now, of course, they don't all cover the same events, that some have things that others do not, but I have found something like this helpful. Now, essentially, what the final days of Jesus is that in an abbreviated sort of Cliff Notes version. You can find more of these. A.T. Robertson, the great Greek scholar that died 100 years ago, produced one of these. I believe I might have that one. This is one I've used. I'm hoping there's one that's ESV out there. I've not been able to find one. If you find an ESV or even a CSB, Harmony of the Gospels, I'd love to see that. But if you have something like this on your shelf at home, or you want to buy one, this could be helpful for you, just to see Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John sort of stacked up against each other. So let me set the scene for you, and then we're going to dive in, and we're going to begin to look at the last days of Jesus' life. Let me start my timer so that our video doesn't go too long. The year is roughly AD 33. We don't know that for sure, but it appears to be most likely. Passover feast is approaching. It's a week-long celebration, and a 30-something rabbi named Jesus has just raised Lazarus from the dead. Just a few miles at Bethany, just 2 miles east of Jerusalem. And this is where Jesus is. There's a dinner there in his honor in Bethany, 2 miles east of Jerusalem before the Passover. That many have come to Bethany. They've left Jerusalem, have come to Bethany, and they've heard of Jesus raising this man Lazarus. They've seen Lazarus in the flesh, knowing that he had died, and now seeing him raised, and they're returning to Jerusalem with news of what this Jesus has done. You can imagine what sort of reception this has in the city as they're preparing for Passover, and they hear of this Jewish rabbi who raised a man from the dead and who claims to be the Messiah, that as the news of Jesus spreads from Bethany to Jerusalem and then throughout the city, that there is this noticeable excitement in the city, this buzz as the Passover approaches, that Jesus is going to come to Jerusalem, that the city is in many ways a powder keg, just waiting for a spark. And so Jesus in Bethany observes the Sabbath, which is Friday evening to Saturday evening. That's an important thing for us to note. We'll see this again as we work through the last days of Jesus. That the Jewish day it began at sundown and ended at sundown. So the Sabbath began on Friday night and in the evening and ended Saturday in the evening. And so as they observed the Sabbath on that Friday evening to Saturday evening, Jesus, after observing the Sabbath, enters into the city of Jerusalem on March 29th, AD 33, the first day of the last week of his life. This is what we're going to look at today, early in the week, Sunday through Tuesday. Sunday, March 29th, AD 33. 3 pieces we want to look at. Jesus entering Jerusalem, Jesus predicting his death, and then Jesus visiting the temple. You'll see there listed, we're talking about Jesus entering the temple. You'll see there the testimony of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John giving us this record. So that messianic expectations that Jesus might be the Messiah ran through the crowd as they expect Jesus to come, and Jesus does not disappoint. That on Sunday morning, Jesus sends 2 disciples from the Mount of Olives to a close village, to Bethany or Bethpage. Or what I'm going to do here is we're going to swap back and forth. I'm going to put up a picture here. They're here. They're out in Bethany, and he sends 2 of his disciples to Bethpage. If this is Jerusalem, right? Temple's here. Garden of Gethsemane's here. Mount of Olives is here. Jesus out here to the east. He's going to come in during the day through the Mount of Olives, right, and come into the city and into the temple. And Jesus, while he's in Bethany, sends 2 of his disciples from the Mount of Olives to a close village, Bethpage or Bethany, and he instructs them to bring a donkey and a colt, which he will ride into Jerusalem. What Jesus is doing is fulfilling messianic prophecy. This is intentional, symbolic prophecy and fulfillment on Jesus' part. It's a fulfillment of Zechariah 9:9, that Israel's king would come riding in on the foal of a donkey. Just like Solomon came in riding in victory, so that the coming Messiah, the true king of Israel, would come riding on a donkey. And so Jesus, having been in Bethany, having raised Lazarus, having the whole city abuzz with messianic expectation, what does Jesus do? He reaches back to a messianic image. He rides into the city on a donkey. So Jesus takes his western descent towards Jerusalem, right? From the Mount of Olives, from Bethpage into Jerusalem. And crowds seeing Jesus on the donkey, they know exactly what it's doing. They rightly interpret, and they lay out the royal carpet for him with palm branches, proclaiming him the Davidic king. They say, "Hosanna to the Son of David. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the coming king, is the coming kingdom of our father David." That's Mark 21:10. They are openly, consider this, they are openly considering and proclaiming Jesus as king instead of Caesar. So that word, Matthew tells us, continues to spread of Jesus throughout Jerusalem, that Jesus is upping the ante. He's raised Lazarus. Messianic expectation is all over Jerusalem, and he rides into Jerusalem, not as an itinerant rabbi, not trying to lay low, but he rides into Jerusalem as the king. So the Pharisees instruct Jesus. They, just like the crowds, know exactly what is happening. They instruct Jesus to rebuke the crowds, tell them to be quiet. Jesus refuses to do so, which has huge both political and religious consequences. That there are huge political and religious volatility invoked by Jesus' actions. That up until this point, up until this week of Jesus' life, that Jesus could have, if he had wanted to, sort of rode off into the sunset. He could have decided to remain an itinerant rabbi, to sort of left the authorities alone, and probably could have lived a happy, long life. What's going to happen beginning with these events on Sunday is the end of the life of Jesus. That he is going to make the situation so untenable that it is either going to end in the overthrow of the Romans and the religious establishment or in his death. That Jesus knows exactly what he is doing and there is no going back. Luke tells us that as he makes this ride into the city, from the east, west into Jerusalem, that he weeps over Jerusalem, over her unbelief, over her unwillingness to accept the Messiah. That John tells us that on this day, as they're in Jerusalem, that some Greeks come to have an audience with Jesus. They come and they say, "We would see Jesus." And it's here that Jesus, in responding to these Greeks, predicts his death. That he responds by reminding them that he is going to die. That like a seed cannot bear fruit unless it is both first dead. That so he is going to also have to die in order to bear much fruit. And as Jesus talks about his upcoming death, that he's going to be lifted up to glorify the Father, a voice from heaven confirms this commitment to glorify his name through the death of Jesus. That Jesus says here that he will be lifted up on a cross, and yet his death will deal Satan a crushing blow. That notice that even as we here, let's go back to this. Sorry. Even as we think about here, we're looking here at John 12. Even as all of these Jews have been expecting Jesus the Messiah, he's playing into what they mean as a Messiah, that they don't have in their mind a Messiah who dies. They have a Messiah who throws off the Romans, who throws off the religious establishment that are persecuting them and putting their legalistic thumb down on them. And so when Jesus predicts his death, the Jewish crowds don't understand. They object that the Messiah must always remain with us. And Jesus instead tells them to walk while they have the light. The light is going out of the world. Before Jesus leaves Jerusalem for the day, Jesus visits the temple. This is Matthew 21, 14 through 17, and Mark 11, 11. That before returning to Bethany, Jesus visits the temple complex. He heals the blind and lame and receives the praise of children. That this is in many ways setting the scene for the conflicts that are about to come the next day. Let's look here sort of at the large Temple Mount. What I'm showing you is from the ESV, right? So this large Temple Mount, sorry. What I'm showing you here is a picture that's from Crossway from the ESV. If you have an ESV study Bible, you'll be able to see something similar to it. Oh, sorry. I'm all over the place today. Here we go. Here is this entire complex is considered the Temple Mount. You've got entrances down here, a place for legal proceedings here. This is the triple gate, the stairway that leads in. There is a sort of an eastern entrance over here, probably one that Jesus took. You have what we're going to see, we'll zoom in a few minutes, this large sort of Temple Mount. You have the Antonius Fortress on this far end up here, which I'll try to get a better picture for you so you can see, which is the place where Herod and the Romans watched over the temple to protect it and to make sure that there were no religious uprisings. And so this temple square right here, this sort of wall that you see right here, is the temple. And this open spot right here is the court of the Gentiles. This is where Gentiles would have been allowed to stay in, right? And then this little wall, it's called a soreg. It's this low sort of latticed railing wall screen thing, and it's what kept Gentiles from going into the next one. So if you were a Gentile, you could be here, but you could not go into the court of the Gentiles, right? Into the next court. That was reserved only for Jews. Right, so it kept them out. And then we'll look here. This is called the court of the women. This is the furthest point that women could enter in. So all Jews could come here, and women could go here. And only Jewish men were allowed further than that. And then here you've got the main part of the temple. That we'll look at later in the week. We'll look at a more detailed drawing of Herod's temple. But that's where the ultimate temple is. So what Jesus does on this Sunday is, before returning to Bethany, he comes to the temple. And we don't know exactly where he is, but he's at the temple complex, probably not here, but probably court of Gentiles, and maybe in where the Jews can go. And he's healing the blind and the lame. He's receiving praise from children, and he's seeing what's there. And what does Jesus see there? He sees money changers. He sees those taking advantage of pilgrims coming to offer worship and make sacrifices at the temple. This is setting the scene for what's going to happen the next day on Monday. Let's go to Monday. On Sunday, at the end of the day, they returned to Bethany for the night. Monday, March 30th, AD 33. Jesus first curses a fig tree there. That morning, Jesus is hungry. So they're coming into Jerusalem. Right? He spots a fig tree. We're looking here at Matthew 21 and Mark 11. Jesus spots a fig tree. Remember, they're coming into Jerusalem. They're coming from the east. They're coming through the Mount of Olives. And Jesus, on this journey in, spots a fig tree that does not have fruit, and he curses it. That in the Old Testament, Israel is often depicted as a fig tree. You see that in Jeremiah 8:13, and Hosea chapter 9, verse 10 and 16, in Joel chapter 1, verse 7. Jesus cursing the fig tree is a symbol of God's judgment upon a nation that has the outward appearance of life, but fails to produce fruit. So it's a picture. It's like this fig tree doesn't have fruit, that ultimately, though looks alive, is dead. Jesus is saying that this is Israel. They look alive, but they're dead, for they fail to bear fruit. So on their way in, Jesus curses the fig tree. And then Jesus comes to the temple. And when Jesus comes to the temple, right, so this is a zoomed-in piece of what we looked at earlier, where this is the place in which only the Jews could go, where outside of this, only Gentiles were allowed. So Jesus comes here, this court of the Gentiles, with all eyes on him, right? All eyes on Jesus as he comes into the city, wondering, what will Jesus do, right? Think about what's just happened the day before. He's rolled in like the Messiah. He's refused to silence the crowds who were calling him the Son of David and were calling him the true king over Caesar. What does he do? He goes straight to the temple, and he was there the night before, and he knows exactly what he's going to find there. Money changers. Merchants selling sacrificial animals in the court of the Gentiles. Now there is a piece in which that some of this is necessary, that you had to use a Tyrian shekel in order to pay the temple tax. If you came in, you needed an unblemished animal. Many people were traveling from far away, didn't have that sort of money, needed their money changed, weren't able to bring an animal with them, or weren't able to afford an animal, a large animal, and have to buy a dove. And so these folks selling animals and changing money were in some ways necessary, but they are largely set up in the court of the Gentiles, the place where the nations could come and worship, and yet it's filled up with money changers. It's filled up with people who are profiteers, who are charging exorbitant rates and charging people crazy interest as they change their money over. That they're profiteers who are preying upon the devotion of the people who must pay the temple tax and offer an unblemished animal. And so what Jesus does, as he enters into these merchants, these money changers, as he overturns their tables. He flips their tables over. He throws out the merchants. He makes a whip, and he refuses entrance to anyone seeking to carry goods to sell. That he says that the temple is meant to be a house of prayer for all nations, quoting from Isaiah 56 and Jeremiah 7, not a place for the rich and powerful to exploit the poor using devotion as a guise. Jesus here throws fuel on the fire, right? If Israel is a powder keg waiting to explode, here is Jesus lighting the match. He's come into the temple, the seat of religious power in Israel, and he says, you're taking advantage of people, that this ought to be a place of worship and of prayer for the nations, and he overturns the tables. He throws out the money changers. He is in this action directly challenging the religious ruling class, who are complicit with and likely benefiting from this corruption. The Pharisees, Sadducees likely benefit from this corruption. And so they begin at this point to look for a way to destroy Jesus, while the common people love what they see from Jesus. They love that Jesus is sort of shaking things up. The Romans themselves need little excuse. We've seen this throughout history up until this point. The Romans need little excuse to intervene when they see civil instability. And so, in one sense, this action on Monday as cleaning the temple seals the fate of Jesus. That the only outcome here is that Jesus will ultimately be put to death. At the end of Monday, Jesus returns. When evening comes, he returns to Bethany, leaves Jerusalem again, Mark 11 and Luke 21. So we've looked at Sunday, we looked at Monday, and then Tuesday. Tuesday, March 31st, AD 33. The lesson from the fig trees in Matthew chapter 21, verses 20 through 22, and Mark 11, 20 through 26. So that early that next day, as they're walking in, remember they're coming in from the east. Oh, excuse me. Remember, they're coming in from the east. They come the same way every day, go back the same way every night. So they pass the fig tree that Jesus had cursed the day before. Peter sees it, and he sees that it's withered, and he remembers what Jesus said. He remembers that Jesus had cursed it. And then Jesus takes this opportunity to remind the disciples, to teach them that they ought to have faith in God, that when they pray, they ought to ask and believe that God will answer their prayer. And he tacks on this end lesson that they ought to forgive each other. Jesus is taking here a real opportunity to teach his disciples in what would be the last week that he had with them. Next, Jesus on Tuesday spends time teaching and engaging in controversies in the temple. We see this in Matthew 21, Mark 11, Luke 20. Early on Tuesday morning, crowds come to hear Jesus speak. Why do you think that is? Well, think about what's happened on Sunday. And on Monday, he receives the messianic proclamations of the crowd. On Monday, he flips over the temples. And so you can imagine word spread. Did you hear what Jesus did today? And then so that by the time Tuesday rolls around and Jesus and the disciples come in, people are waiting for him. What's he going to do now? Well, he's turning everything over. He's upsetting everything. And so immediately when Jesus comes in, he is confronted by the chief priest, the scribes, and the elders concerning what he'd done the previous 2 days. And they demand to know by what authority he is doing all of this. They're the ones that supposedly have the authority to drive out money changers, to guard the temple, to make sure that worship is happening appropriately. And they think that they've caught him in a place where he would have no good answer. What Jesus does is he turns the table on them. We see this in Mark 11, verse 30. He asked them, was the baptism of John from heaven or from man? And we find is that they have no real answer. That either way, they'll find themselves in trouble. If they say that the baptism of John was from heaven, then they'll be asked, well, why don't you believe John? Why didn't you listen to John when John pointed you to Jesus and his work? And if they say that the baptism of John was from man, They know how beloved John was among the people. And they know that they'll have a revolt on their hands, and so they are silent. And Jesus follows up this answer, this question that he gives them, in their silence, with a series of parables meant to call them out. First is the parable of the tenants. There's nothing subtle here in this parable. It's a parable about a vineyard owner and those who work the vineyard. And this owner sends his messengers to the vineyard, and they're killed over and over again. Ultimately, he sent the son, and the slaves there, the workers of the vineyard, kill the son. What Jesus is saying here is that the religious leaders recognize, or rather there's nothing subtle here, that the religious leaders recognize the parable as having been spoken against them. They understand that Jesus is condemning them, that the vineyard owner is God, that the vineyard is Israel, that the slaves are God's prophets, that the son is Jesus, that the destruction of the evil tenants is God's judgment on Israel's unrighteous leaders, and that the giving of the vineyard to others is God's extension of the kingdom to the Gentiles. They receive the parable of tenants as a parable against them, calling out those in religious authority. And then he tells the parable of the wedding feast in Matthew 22, where he makes similar points, that the religious leaders have rejected God's invitation and therefore will be judged, and the invitation will be opened up to others. And so the authorities, as you can guess, don't take this lying down, but instead seek to find a way to arrest Jesus. But they can, because Jesus is incredibly too popular with the crowd. And so they try to trick him into incriminating himself. They send the Pharisees and the Herodians, it's this sect that were loyal to Herod's dynasty, to ask him, is it legal to pay tax to Caesar or not? Right? They think that they have him tricked, right? They think that they've boxed him in, that he has no good answer. If he says yes, then he would disappoint those who think he's going to overthrow Rome. If he says no, then he's fomenting rebellion and Rome will get him. It's interesting here that we find Herodians and the Pharisees working together because they are political and religious rivals. And so Jesus answers in the most wise way possible. Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and give to God what is God's. The denarius had on its face Caesar's image, and so Jesus says it's appropriate to pay taxes. But what has God's image? What bears the image of God? Us. So therefore Jesus is saying we owe everything to God. That in the coming kingdom, in the kingdom of Jesus, that there is no denarius that bears the image of any Caesar, but we will all bear the image of God, and thus God is due everything that we have. The Sadducees, this group that did not believe, sort of the opposite of the Pharisees, the Sadducees didn't believe, they rejected most of the Old Testament, but outside of the Pentateuch, they didn't believe in a coming resurrection, they didn't believe in a heaven or hell. They seek to sort of trip Jesus up now with this tricky theological question. And they ask him a question about the resurrection and marriage, connected to levirate marriage. In the Old Testament, levirate marriage was if a man was married to a woman and he died, that his brother would marry her to father children that would carry on the dead brother's line. And so they sort of set up this absurd scenario that a wife marries a man and he dies, and she marries his brother and he dies, and sort of on down the line, and no children are born. And so they say, well, in the resurrection, Jesus, whose wife is she? She was married to all of the brothers. Now, we know that it's absurd because they don't believe in the resurrection. They're seeking just to make Jesus' belief in the resurrection look silly. And so they ask him about levirate marriage and the resurrection. And Jesus replies, really interestingly, that God is the God of the living, not of the dead. That he points to the fact that God is not the God of the dead, of those who are gone, but God is the God of the living. And they don't know how to respond. Like the Pharisees before them, they fall silent. The Pharisees send another questioner to Jesus, this time to ask him what is the greatest commandment. And Jesus quotes from Deuteronomy 6 and Leviticus 19 that to say the greatest commandment is this: to love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength. And the second is like it, to love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus says the whole law is summed up in this: to love God and to love neighbor. And it's here that Jesus goes on the counteroffensive, that as he's engaged in this conflict with them in the temple, he asks them a question concerning Psalm 110. And how it can simultaneously describe the Messiah as being David's Lord. He said, how can this Messiah be both David's son and Lord at the same time? Right, the Messiah being of Davidic ancestry posed no problem, right, to the Messiah being Lord. But if the ancestry of the Messiah was interpreted to make him merely human, merely a son of David, then that was going to be a problem. And so Jesus, where they sought to ask him a question that he could not answer, Jesus again asked them a question they cannot answer, and they are left silent. And Jesus ends this section with a scathing critique of the religious institutions of the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and having shown them unable to answer spiritual questions, having shown them completely unaware of the things of God, he issues this critique. He calls them hypocrites, blind guides, and pronounces 7 woes of judgment against them. This, again with the events of Monday and Sunday, solidify the ultimate end of these two parties, that they cannot coexist. That what is happening as we move from Sunday to Monday to Tuesday is that we are setting the stage for what's going to come in the back half of the week. That nobody who saw what was happening on Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday in the temple would think that Jesus is making it out alive. They're setting the stage for what is to come. As they leave Jerusalem that night, Tuesday evening, as they go back, right? As they leave Jerusalem to go back through the Mount of Olives, back to Bethany. As they're on the Mount of Olives, Jesus takes this time to teach his disciples. As they're leaving, they're marveling about the size and the grandeur of the temple. So you can imagine as they're walking here, they're walking there, they can look up and they can see the temple as they're sort of taking this path, whatever it might be, sort of back to Bethany. They're able to look up and to see the temple. They're marveling about the size of the temple. And Jesus says that a time is coming when not one stone of the temple would be laid on another. And so they stop to rest on the Mount of Olives here. And his disciples ask about the timing of this event. When would the temple be destroyed? And that the signs of the coming of the end of the age. And so Matthew gives us these questions about the end of all things and is showing us that as they sort of ask about the destruction of the temple and the end of all things, the way that Matthew sort of puts these things together, he helps us to see here that the disciples saw the destruction of the temple and the end of all things as coming together. They thought it would be the same event. So what we get here is what's often called the Olivet Discourse, the Olivet teaching. And it's Jesus' answer, which he talks about the destruction of the temple and the coming end of all things. But it's not always clear when Jesus is talking, if he's talking about the temple or he's talking about the end times, because the destruction of the temple, which would ultimately come in AD 70, is a type or a picture, a symbol of the coming judgment of the end of all things. The main theme of the entire Olivet Discourse is this: that followers of Jesus will experience increasing persecution and tribulation leading up to the final day of judgment, but they must remain vigilant and persist in faith. Jesus there tells the parable of the 10 virgins and the parable of the talents as he points them forward to remaining vigilant and persistent in the faith. So, bringing to a conclusion the first few days of the week. This overview of the first few days of the week really does, in many ways, set the stage for all that is to come, that the King Jesus, has come for his kingdom and has issued a clear and direct challenge to the reigning structures of political, economic, and religious power. That Israel, Jerusalem, beginning on Sunday was a powder keg, and Jesus has lit the match, that it is all about to explode, and very quickly, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, we're going to see everything come to an head and lead to the destruction of the Son of God, to the death of Jesus at the hands of the Jews and the Romans. I want to encourage you to go back and to look at this video, to pull up the PDF and to read these texts, and then begin to look forward to next week. So as we're going to cover Wednesday and part of Thursday next week, read Matthew 26, Mark 14, Luke 21, and John 13 and 14 as we look to Wednesday and part of Thursday, the last day of Jesus' life. Thank you for joining me. I'll see you next week.